A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You ever look at a map of the world in March 2026 and realize it looks a bit like a high-stakes bridge tournament at a very exclusive retirement home? We are currently living through a period where the two most powerful men on the planet are 79 and 76 years old, and they are not exactly spending their golden years working on their golf handicaps. Well, maybe one of them is, but he is doing it between drone strikes. Today's prompt from Daniel is about this exact phenomenon, the secret to the energy and decision-making power of leaders like Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. He is asking how these guys, who are well past the standard retirement age in the United States and Israel, are managing to run a joint military campaign like Operation Roaring Lion without, needing a nap every 20 minutes.
It is a fascinating question, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have been diving into the latest research on what scientists are now calling the SuperAger archetype. We are not just talking about people who are healthy for their age. We are looking at a specific biological profile that allows certain individuals to maintain the cognitive function of someone 30 years younger. When you look at the current global landscape, it is actually a statistical anomaly. The median age of world leaders right now is 62. Only 5% of global leaders are in their 80s, yet here we are with the most intense geopolitical conflict of the decade being directed by men who would qualify for the early bird special at any diner in Florida. It creates this strange gerontocracy paradox where the people with the most responsibility are the ones the actuarial tables say should be slowing down.
It is a wild contrast, especially when you think back to the narrative around Joe Biden before he left office in January 2025. The scrutiny on his age was relentless. And then we found out in May 2025 about the stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer diagnosis, specifically a Gleason score of 9. It puts a lot of that fatigue we saw into a very different perspective. It was not just age, it was a massive internal battle. But even now, at 83, Biden is reportedly still active with his library and his memoir while undergoing intense hormone and radiation therapy. But Trump and Netanyahu, they seem to be running on some kind of high-octane fuel that the rest of us do not have access to. Is it just good genes, or are they actually built differently?
The science suggests it is both, and the timing of this research is perfect. In February 2026, Professor David Sinclair out of Harvard released a follow-up to his longevity research specifically focusing on high-capacity seniors. They define a SuperAger as someone over 80 with the memory and executive function of a 50-year-old. One of the biggest markers they found is the thickness of the anterior cingulate cortex. This is a region of the brain that is essentially the hub for attention, ethics, and impulse control. In most people, this area thins out significantly as we age, leading to distractibility or emotional volatility. In SuperAgers, it stays thick, sometimes even thicker than in people in their mid-40s.
Wait, so you were saying Trump and Netanyahu might literally have more brain mass in the decision-making centers than the people half their age who are working for them? That explains a lot about the confidence levels. I can barely decide what I want for lunch without a second opinion, and these guys are debating the merits of striking Iranian gas fields over breakfast. It is like they have a biological armor against the typical wear and tear of the brain.
That anterior cingulate cortex is essentially the engine of executive function. It allows for high-level information filtering. There was a meta-analysis published in medRxiv in 2024 that looked at information processing speed versus decision accuracy. It found that while older brains might take a few more milliseconds to retrieve a specific name or date, they are significantly better at filtering out noise. They are less prone to what we call overconfidence bias and, perhaps most importantly for world leaders, the sunk cost bias. A younger leader might double down on a failing strategy because they are emotionally invested in being right or proving their strength. An older, resilient brain is more likely to use strategic learning to pivot. They have a larger library of patterns to draw from, which allows them to see the end of the movie while the younger staff are still trying to figure out the plot of the first act.
Strategic learning. That sounds like a fancy way of saying they have seen this movie before and they know how it ends. But let's look at the lifestyle side of this, because this is where the SuperAger theory gets really weird. You look at Donald Trump. 79 years old, he reportedly sleeps maybe 4 or 5 hours a night. He drinks up to 12 Diet Cokes a day. His diet is basically a tribute to the Golden Arches. And yet, he's out there at rallies for 2 hours at a time in the middle of a military campaign. He credits very good genetics, which sounds like a bit of a dodge, but is there actually a genetic shield at play here?
There is a very specific one. SuperAgers are 28% more likely to carry the ApoE2 gene variant. This is a specific version of a gene that appears to protect the brain against the accumulation of amyloid plaques, which are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's. It is like having a natural internal cleaning crew for your neurons that works overtime. While most of us are accumulating cellular trash as we age, people with this variant are keeping the hallways clear. Trump also takes 325 milligrams of aspirin daily. That is 4 times the standard low dose for heart health. He says it is to thin his blood and keep the energy up. While most doctors would be cautious about that dosage due to bleeding risks, for someone with his specific physiology and high-stress lifestyle, it might be contributing to that high-velocity blood flow that keeps him alert during those late-night briefings on Operation Roaring Lion.
And then you have Netanyahu on the other side of the war room. 76 years old. He is the polar opposite in terms of habits. He is the guy snacking on carrots and lettuce during cabinet meetings. He is on a treadmill twice a week. He has a pacemaker that was put in back in 2023, and he just had hernia and prostate surgery earlier this year. He is like a classic car that gets a full engine rebuild every 10,000 miles. He is meticulous about the maintenance.
The contrast is fascinating because it shows 2 different paths to the same result. Netanyahu is using aggressive medical management and disciplined lifestyle choices to maintain his edge. He has people like Moshe Bar Simon Tov, the Health Ministry Director General, and Health Minister Chaim Katz, ensuring that his medical data is monitored almost minute by minute. Trump seems to be relying on a robust genetic baseline that tolerates high-stress, low-sleep environments. But both of them are operating in what scientists call a high-challenge environment. This is the other key to the SuperAger phenomenon. If you retire and sit on a porch, your brain starts to prune connections it thinks it no longer needs. It is a biological cost-saving measure. But if you are directing a multinational military campaign against Iran, your brain is under constant, intense demand to stay sharp. The stress itself, in the right dose, might actually be keeping them young. It is called hormesis. The idea that a beneficial effect results from exposure to low doses of an agent that is otherwise toxic or lethal.
It is the use it or lose it principle on a global scale. But there is a point where the stress becomes a liability, right? We saw that friction on March 20th. There was that reported disagreement over the strike on the Iranian gas field. Trump publicly said he told Netanyahu, quote, "Don't do that," unquote. That is a high-stakes moment where 2 70-plus-year-old men are staring each other down over the possibility of a global energy crisis or a wider war. At that age, does the ability to handle that kind of interpersonal friction stay intact, or does it become a battle of 2 stubborn grandfathers?
The research on strategic learning suggests it actually improves. Younger leaders often react from a place of ego or a need to establish dominance in the room. Older leaders who have maintained their cognitive health tend to view these disagreements as tactical puzzles. They are looking at the second and third order effects. When Trump tells Netanyahu not to hit a gas field, he is likely thinking about the domestic gasoline prices in the United States and the impact on the 2026 midterms or his own approval ratings. It is a very cold, calculated form of reasoning that requires a lot of neural resilience. They aren't getting swept up in the heat of the moment as much because their anterior cingulate cortex is helping them filter out the emotional noise.
It is interesting you mention the cold calculation, because the public perception is often the opposite. People see the age and they assume fragility. We saw that in mid-March with the rumors about Netanyahu's health. He was off social media for 3 days, and suddenly the Iranian media is claiming he is in a coma and that his recent videos are AI-generated deepfakes. It was a full-blown digital panic. The Prime Minister's office had to release a full medical report, a clean bill of health, just to stop the markets from crashing. That is the vulnerability of the SuperAger leader. You are one 3-day weekend away from a global conspiracy theory.
And that is a unique pressure of the digital age in 2026. We have the tools to simulate leadership through AI, which makes the actual physical presence of the leader more important than ever. The fact that Netanyahu's team felt the need to prove he was not a large language model tells you everything about the stakes. But look at the policy side of this too. Trump launched the Make America Healthy Again initiative, or MAHA, earlier this year. It is focused on chronic disease and food quality. There is a hilarious irony in a guy who loves Kentucky Fried Chicken leading a crusade against processed foods, but it actually fits the SuperAger profile. They are often hyper-aware of health because they know their power is tied directly to their physical survival. It is almost like he is trying to legislate the longevity he feels he has naturally.
It is the ultimate insurance policy. If I can make the whole country healthy, maybe I can hang on for another decade. But let's talk about the biological cost. We covered this a bit in episode 1248, talking about the statesman's brain. The sheer amount of cortisol and adrenaline these men are pumping through their systems at 79 must be astronomical. Even with the ApoE-epsilon-2 gene, there has to be a trade-off. You cannot run a nuclear-armed state on 4 hours of sleep and Diet Coke forever without something giving way.
The trade-off is often physical fragility versus cognitive resilience. Their brains might be functioning at a 50-year-old level, but their bones and cardiovascular systems are still 79. That is why the pacemaker for Netanyahu or the high-dose aspirin for Trump are so critical. They are managing the hardware so the software can keep running at peak speed. What is really interesting is the role of the anterior cingulate cortex in managing that stress. It acts as a buffer. It allows them to process high-pressure information without the emotional burnout that would flatten a younger person. They have developed a sort of neurological callousing. They have been through so many crises that the brain no longer registers them as existential threats, just as problems to be solved.
Neurological callousing. I like that. It is like they have built up a literal thick skin on their brains. But what does this mean for the rest of us? Daniel's prompt asks about the secret to their energy. If we're not world leaders with access to the best doctors in Jerusalem or the White House, and we did not win the genetic lottery with that Epsilon 2 variant, is there anything we can actually take away from this? Or are we just doomed to be tired and forgetful once we hit 65?
There are actually some very practical takeaways from the Northwestern and Harvard studies. First, the high-challenge environment is something anyone can replicate. It is about cognitive labor. You have to engage with complex, difficult tasks that make you feel a bit uncomfortable. It is not about doing crosswords. It is about learning a new language or managing a complex project where the outcome matters. Second, the strategic learning aspect is a skill. It is the conscious effort to stop and ask, am I doing this because it is the right move or because I am already committed to it? SuperAgers naturally do this because of their brain structure, but the rest of us can train ourselves to avoid that sunk cost bias. It is about slowing down the decision just enough to let the noise filter out.
So basically, if you want to stay sharp, don't retire. Just find a more difficult job. Maybe don't start a war with Iran, but maybe take up something more demanding than birdwatching. It also seems like social engagement is a huge part of it. These guys are constantly surrounded by people, constantly debating, constantly in the mix. There is no isolation.
Isolation is the silent killer of cognitive function. In the SuperAger studies, social connectivity was one of the strongest predictors of brain volume. Even if that social connectivity involves yelling at your cabinet members or holding massive rallies, it is still intense social stimulation. It keeps the neural pathways firing. And then there is the dietary aspect. Even though Trump and Netanyahu have opposite diets, they both have a regimen. They have a system. Whether it is 12 Diet Cokes or a bowl of carrots, there is a consistency to how they fuel themselves that prevents the metabolic swings that cause brain fog. They are keeping their blood sugar and their chemistry within a very specific, albeit unusual, range.
I love the idea of 12 Diet Cokes being a regimen. It is a bold choice. But when you look at the global reality of March 2026, with Operation Roaring Lion in full swing, there is a real question about succession. If the world is being held together by the specific neural resilience of a few 75-plus-year-olds, what happens when they are gone? We are seeing a world that has adapted to the elder statesman model. The median age might be 62, but the power is concentrated in the 70s and 80s.
It creates a massive stability risk. We saw it with the Netanyahu health rumors. The global markets are essentially betting on the continued health of these specific individuals. If a 40-year-old leader has a health scare, the vice president or a deputy steps in and life goes on without much of a ripple. If a SuperAger leader like Trump or Netanyahu falters, it feels like a systemic failure because so much of their leadership is tied to their personal, almost mythical, level of energy. We talked about this in episode 1303, The Paradox of Power in Israel's New Reality. The victory in the 12-day war was seen as a personal triumph for Netanyahu's strategy, which makes him seem indispensable. When the leader is the strategy, their biology becomes the most important national security asset.
It is the cult of the indispensable elder, and it is not just a personality thing, it is a biological reality. If you have spent 40 years building the neural pathways to handle a specific type of geopolitical chess, you can't just hand that over to a 45-year-old and expect the same result. They haven't had the time to develop that strategic learning capacity or that neurological callousing. So we are stuck in this loop where we need these guys because they're the only ones with the specific brain architecture to handle the mess. But the mess exists partly because they have been in charge for so long. It is a self-perpetuating cycle of experience.
That is the ultimate feedback loop. The older the leaders get, the more complex the global situation becomes, which requires even more experienced leaders to manage it. It is also worth noting that the medical technology of 2026 is helping to bridge that gap. We are seeing more use of real-time health monitoring. Netanyahu's pacemaker is not just a battery, it is a data hub. It is providing his medical team with a constant stream of information. This kind of proactive management is what allows a 76-year-old to undergo 2 surgeries in a few months and be back in the war room the next week. We are moving toward a world where the leader's body is essentially a monitored piece of infrastructure.
It is basically the bionic prime minister. I wonder if Trump has a similar setup. He seems more like the type to refuse a wearable and just tell you he feels great. But you have to imagine the White House medical unit is doing some pretty advanced monitoring in 2026. They have to be. The stakes are too high. If his blood pressure spikes during a briefing on Iranian missile silos, someone is going to know about it before he even feels a headache.
They almost certainly are. The Make America Healthy Again initiative actually includes a push for more widespread use of these metabolic monitoring tools for the general public. It is an interesting case of a leader's personal health strategy becoming national policy. If Trump sees the benefit of blood thinning and constant monitoring, he wants that for the whole country. It is a way of projecting his own personal resilience onto the United States. He is saying, if I can do this at 79, you have no excuse.
Which brings us back to Daniel's question about the secret. It seems to be a combination of winning the genetic lottery with the epsilon 2 gene, having a brain that literally refuses to thin out in the decision-making centers, and then layering a high-demand, high-stress environment on top of that to keep the gears turning. Plus, a very specific relationship with caffeine or carrots. It is not something you can just buy at a pharmacy, but it is a fascinating look at what the human machine is capable of when it is pushed to the absolute limit.
What I find most compelling is that we are essentially witnessing a massive, real-time experiment in human longevity. We have never had this many people, this old, holding this much power during a period of such intense technological and military change. In previous centuries, a 79-year-old would have been a rare exception in leadership. Now, they are the standard. We are learning that the brain, if it has the right genetic and environmental support, does not have a set expiration date for high-level function. The anterior cingulate cortex can stay thick and functional well into the 9th decade if it is given enough work to do.
It is a bit terrifying if you think about it. We could be looking at the era of the 100-year-old president by the time we hit the 2040s. If these SuperAger trends continue and the medical management gets even better, the standard retirement age of 67 is going to look like a joke. We will have people running for office while their great-great-grandchildren are graduating from college. The generational gap won't just be a gap, it will be a canyon.
The economic implications of that are huge. If the top tier of leadership across all sectors stays in place until their 90s, what happens to the career paths of everyone else? We are already seeing that friction in the corporate world. But in politics, it is even more pronounced because it is about the vision of the future. Can a 79-year-old truly plan for a world 30 years from now? The strategic learning data says yes, because they are better at long-term pattern recognition. They aren't distracted by the latest fad. They are looking at the historical arc. But the public perception is always going to struggle with that.
Well, if the pattern they are recognizing is that they are going to live forever, then they have every incentive to plan for the long term. I think the big takeaway for me is that we need to stop looking at age as a single number and start looking at it as a biological state. Joe Biden at 83, dealing with cancer in the aftermath of a presidency, is in a very different biological state than Donald Trump at 79 or Netanyahu at 76. The number is the same, but the machine under the hood is totally different. One is a car with a failing engine. The others are high-performance vehicles with reinforced frames.
That is the key distinction. Chronological age versus biological age. The SuperAger research is effectively decoupling those two things. When we look at the leaders of 2026, we are seeing the first generation of people who have the tools and the genetics to truly bridge that gap. Whether that is a good thing for global stability or a recipe for a permanent gerontocracy is the question we are going to be answering for the next decade. But for now, the data suggests that these men are not just hanging on, they are operating at a level that defies our traditional understanding of aging.
I just want to know if I can get some of that anterior cingulate cortex thickness by drinking more Diet Coke, because if that is the secret, I am halfway there already. But seriously, it is a reminder that the brain is a lot more resilient than we give it credit for. If you keep the pressure on and you have the right internal cleaning crew, you can stay in the game a lot longer than the standard retirement charts suggest. It is about the intensity of the engagement.
Just don't forget the carrots. Netanyahu might be onto something with the lettuce snacks. It is all about the balance between the high-octane genetics and the disciplined maintenance, and maybe a bit of luck with that APOE epsilon 2 variant.
And maybe a little bit of that aspirin. But check with your doctor first, because 325 milligrams is a lot of blood thinning for someone who isn't trying to win a primary or run a war. This has been a deep dive into the SuperAger phenomenon, and honestly, I feel a little more energetic just talking about it. Or maybe that is just the caffeine kicking in.
It is the cognitive labor, corn. We are building our own calluses right now. We are engaging with the data, processing the complexity, and that is exactly what the Harvard study says we should be doing.
I can feel my brain thickening as we speak. It is a strange sensation. But we should probably wrap this up before we start making any major geopolitical decisions ourselves. We have covered the neuroscience, the genetic markers like the epsilon 2 variant, and the strange lifestyle habits that seem to power the world's most influential seniors in 2026. It is a wild time to be alive, especially if you are 79 and running for leader of the free world.
It really is. The secret isn't one thing. It is the perfect storm of biology, technology, and a refusal to slow down. It is the refusal to accept the standard narrative of decline.
Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the show running while we nerd out on brain mass. And a huge thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. We literally couldn't do this without that serverless horsepower.
If you enjoyed this exploration of the SuperAger archetype, you should definitely check out episode 1248 on the biological cost of power. It provides a lot of the foundational context for how high-stakes leadership physically changes the brain. And if you want more on the current situation in the Middle East, episode 1303 covers the new global reality Israel is navigating.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you want to make sure you never miss an episode where we explain why your brain might be thinning out, search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram to get notified the second a new episode drops.
We will be back next time with whatever Daniel throws at us. Stay sharp.
And maybe have a carrot or a Diet Coke, dealer's choice. See ya.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We keep